Wilson sort of concedes this point in his book. Let's say we reach majority Christianity and then we outlaw all public forms of religion except Christianity. Well, my eschatology says if that were to happen, there's no promise that Christians are going to remain in power. So what happens in 100 years when we've given government power to outlaw certain forms of religion and Christians are not in power anymore?
Yeah.
So now we've given them the power to outlaw Christianity.
Welcome to Grounded, a podcast for restoring the church to a biblical foundation. My guest today is Scott Aniol. Let me give you a little bio. He is president of G3 Ministries. He's a professor of pastoral theology at Grace Bible Theological Seminary. He's an author. He's written primarily on worship and culture, but other things as well, and one of the elders at his church, Praise Mill Baptist in Douglasville, Georgia. Welcome, Scott. I believe, I'm not sure, do you know? I think this is your fifth time on.
That sounds about right. I don't know exactly, but it's been several.
Feels like it. Christian nationalism. It's come up a little bit here and a little bit there in our conversations. I'm going to spend a little more time on it with you today because I honestly want to get your take. I'm trying to figure this thing out. I think I know where I've landed, but I'd like you to nudge me in different directions if you want to.
Yeah.
So let me just start here on Christian nationalism. I think I've noticed that recently you're talking more about things political than you used to. You in G3, you're talking more about things political than you used to. Or was I just not paying enough attention before? Is there a change? If so, why a change?
Yeah. I've always been, sort of engaged and commented on culture and political things. And G3 has to a certain extent as well. The change you're probably noticing, well, it's a little bit of a change. A number of years ago, maybe about 3 years ago now, we started a podcast called G3 Weekly that another gentleman was doing for us, and it was just audio and print. It wasn't video. And he did that for about a year, and that was basically, summarizing the news events of the week from a Christian perspective. We did that maybe a year or longer, ended up having to shift focus on that. But I relaunched it in November as a video podcast that I've been doing. Very similar format, though, just commenting on 4 or 5 of the most recent news events from a Christian perspective. So we have been doing that, but not in a video format. So that's new for us, and that may be what you're noticing. But I wouldn't say it's a change in focus necessarily. But it was intentional. I felt like there was a need for offering a perspective on issues of the day from a Christian perspective. And I'll be honest, it does relate to the whole Christian nationalism conversation.
Yes.
Because those who, proudly take that label, many of whom are post-mill theonomists, of which I am not, they do a good job in terms of commenting on current events and offering a biblical perspective. And I often agree 90% of the time with what they're saying, but there is a little bit of a different, obviously, theological bent in their goals in that and how they're approaching some of that, that I definitely would differ with. And so I felt like it's a good thing. Christians ought to know what's going on and ought to know how to respond biblically. But I've felt like this for years. I mean, ever since Trump ran for the first time, I feel like I'm caught often in the middle of two opposing positions, and I don't really hold either. And I really want to offer a middle, I hate to say middle way because usually that means a cop-out, but, a middle position that not many people are articulating on things. And so, I thought that was something that I could offer, and it's been well received so far. So I'm thankful for that.
Pretty nice. Thank you for doing that. So regarding Christian nationalism, I think the last time you and I spoke just momentarily about it, you said something like, correct me if I got this wrong, fix it up. You agree with the end, but it's how you get there. So not the means that are being. If I got that right, what are you talking about there? Tell us.
Yeah, that's true. I would also add the timing. So, if the end goal is nations ruled by a Christian prince, as and explicitly identifying as Christian nations. I agree that's where everything is headed. But number one, I don't believe that's going to happen until Jesus comes again. Jesus will be the Christian prince. No
So
human,
your eschatology is informing this.
right? No
Yeah.
human government leader will be able to, nor does he have the right to be a Christian prince. In other words, a sort of infallible, Christian civil ruler. And yes, the means. I believe that the means by which that will take place is twofold. Right now, there is the spiritual ingathering of the people of God through the Great Commission, the proclamation of the gospel. And then, of course, Christians ought to live out their Christian faith in holistic ways under the lordship of Christ. But there is no promise, nor is there any mandate in this age prior to the coming of Christ for us to somehow, through non-spiritual means, whether it be through the sword or through legal force, to establish Christianity in nations. So again, that will happen when Jesus comes again. It will happen by force then, but it will be Jesus who will be enforcing his rule at his second coming. So yeah, it's means and timing that I disagree with most Christian nationalists on.
Interesting. I hope I remember to come back to timing, but I want to go to means first and follow up with this a little bit. So I've been trying to read who's out there, who are some of the key people who are talking about these issues and so on, trying to listen to them some, read them. And I have a distinct impression that maybe you have a different impression. I'd like to know. My impression is that they are mostly, all of them, I'm sure there's some I haven't read, the ones I'm exposed to and some of the biggest names out there who are advocating Christian nationalism are advocating it to come about, or believing it will come about as a result of the means of grace. Preaching the gospel, planting churches, building churches. They might throw in there adding Christian schools so that you get young people who aren't, taken by the philosophy in the public school. But they're saying this is how we do it. So they want to get there, and they're talking a lot about how they want to get there and what effect this will have on government. But it won't have these effects on government until you have like a supermajority of the population are Christians.
Yeah.
They believe they're post-mill. You and I are amill. They're post-mill. They believe we'll get there. If post-mill is right, we will get there one day before Jesus comes.
Right.
And I kind of wish it was right. I'd love to see it happen now. But I am amill, man. I'm as amill as the day is long. And I even gave post-mill a really good chance. I thought I'm going to find out their best authors, read them, and pretend in my own mind like I really want to believe this. I'm going to try to believe it and see if it can convince me.
Yeah.
I'm more amill than I was before. But yeah, part of what's going on is the timing. They're post-mill. They believe it can and will happen here. But I think they have the same means in mind that you do.
Yeah.
You just disagree?
I'll address that in a minute. First of all, you may never have me on again, but I'm actually pre-mill, so that even makes it an entirely different conversation.
You're probably historic pre-mill.
What's that?
Historic pre-mill?
Well, like a lot of these issues, I find myself in the middle. Sort of George Ladd historic pre-mill, I don't find convincing. I mean, it's basically only based on Revelation 19:20, and I would go further than kind of your traditional historic pre-mill. But I disagree with a lot with sort of dispensational pre-mill too. So I'm kind of a weird hybrid. But when it comes to what we ought to be doing in this age, pre-mill and amill, find a lot of agreement.
Same thing.
So what you're describing there, so what's interesting, Christian nationalism kind of really exploded in 2023. And since then, I think what we've seen is a little bit of an intramural split within those who self-identify as Christian nationalists.
Agreed.
You do have those that you described who are arguing, yes, we want a Christian nation and we think it can happen, but it will happen only through the means of grace. And that would be people like Doug Wilson and people in his orbit. And, I reviewed his book, on the Mere Christendom back in 2023 and agreed with a lot of it. When he talks like that, I'm in full agreement. and I'll get back to him in a moment, but there is a large, I don't know about large, but a vocal group of Christian nationalists who, when they hear Wilson say things like that, vigorously disagree. They believe that we have to use the levers of the state and politics in order to achieve a Christian nation. So I think one of the first times.
Can you name some names? Who should I look for? Name some names.
Yeah, well, Joel Webbin, the Ogden guys, right. That group. Certainly Stephen Wolfe, those kind of guys. And the first time I really noticed the split occurring was when Doug Wilson was on with Tucker Carlson, and Wilson made the point. I think he explicitly said, politics is not the answer. And that was sort of posted on X as a clip. And when that was posted, all those guys, and I remember Stephen Wolfe in particular, vigorously disagreeing that no, politics is the answer. So there is a split. I find much more agreement with Wilson and those who, argue that this needs to happen through faithful living and regular means of grace. Where I do differ with them, though, there is a point in their thinking, though, where once Christians become a majority, then what happens? And there I would vigorously disagree with what they would say. They would say once Christians become a majority, then we state ourselves as a Christian nation. We only allow Christians into public office. We outlaw all other, non-Christian religions. And they have a set of, ideals that they advocate for that I would say we have no right to do, even if, and I pray that this would happen, that the United States of America would reach a point where the gospel has spread to such a degree that the citizenry is majority Christian. That would be wonderful. But even if that were to happen, I don't think we have the right to enforce the first table of the moral law in the civil laws of a nation. That would be the biggest point of disagreement.
All right. Well, I am heartened to hear that you like the one side of the split anyway. You don't like them in every way, but you like them.
From my perspective, because of my eschatology, I don't think we're ever going to get to the point where we have to make that decision, because my eschatology says things are going to get worse and worse, generally speaking. So with that in mind, I can applaud what they're advocating for and say, yes, let's build churches, let's spread the gospel, let's encourage people to live faithfully in the public sphere. Let's encourage people to be politicians. Christians should be politicians and should try to encourage morality in the public sphere. All of that's great. And I think I can get along with that version of Christian nationalism really well, because I don't think we're going to get to the point where we reach a majority and then, have to decide what we're going to do next.
Yeah. So eschatology really does drive some of the differences here, in my opinion. If you really believe, if you're really post-mill and you really believe that the kingdom is going to come before the king returns visibly, bodily, then it can happen.
Right.
It's going to happen.
Right.
Let's start working toward it happening.
Exactly.
I believe it can happen, but in lesser ways. I'm looking backward in church history, and I'm certainly, nobody would mistake me for a great historian, but I'm looking backward in church history, and I'm seeing times in our nation's earlier days, and I'm seeing times in other nations' days, earlier times in world history, where certain places and times were very Christianized.
Sure.
I think Calvin's Geneva could be an example, and sure, they made some mistakes with it, but we can learn from their mistakes. So can that kind of thing happen again? Could it happen again and in our nation? Well, if so, I would love it. So that's about where I am as far as Christian nationalism. Can we have a way more Christianized nation, and it naturally then flows into laws? Let's have God's laws, not man's depraved laws, and so on and so forth. I think it can happen, even though I'm amill. By the way, you told me that you're pre-mill, and you hope you'll be a guest again. We have 7 elders at our church. I'm one of them. One of our elders is pre-mill, so there you go. I like pre-mill guys.
Yeah.
I'm
in the minority among our elders as well. So
are you?
Yeah.
And they embrace you anyway.
They do.
Yeah. All right. Staying with the theme of Christian nationalism a little more. In one of our talks, you referenced two-kingdom theology. I've read up on some on two-kingdom theology. I'm sure an expert, but I'm having a hard time figuring out what's the real difference if you believe in two-kingdom theology how does it differ from a worked out Christian nationalism when both of them are saying preach the gospel, plant churches, and that'll flow out into culture and into politics? Do you see a big difference between two kingdom theology and what Christian nationalism would do relative to those things?
Yes, and it relates to what we already talked about. It relates to what would happen or what the goal is. So with a two kingdom theology, and there are different versions of kingdom theology as well. I mean, the interesting thing here is that Stephen Wolfe claims to hold his two kingdom theology and claims not to be a postmillennialist. So his book that really sparked this whole debate is an entirely kind of different thing, and it's more about Christian political thought, and again, he's one of those who says politics ought to be used to advance Christianity. So there's a whole other debate there. But the version of two kingdom theology, and really, I mean, this is I'm a Reformed Baptist, and in my view, this is inherent to what it means to be a Reformed Baptist. This is articulated. This version of two kingdom theology is articulated in the 1689 Confession, and that is that there are, and sometimes it's referred to as you'll see it referred to as God's two kingdoms. That's important to recognize. It's not that there's God's kingdom and then there's man's kingdom. No, they're both God's kingdoms, or sometimes it's described as God's twofold kingdom. That's how Calvin and some in his tradition articulated it. So God is ruling the whole thing, but in this age, God has destined for there to be a spiritual kingdom of his people, governed by his word and ruled through his church, and then the common kingdoms of this world that he still rules over, but he rules in a different way. He rules through rules through providence and sovereignty, and through, some will describe it as natural law or general revelation. So it's still God's law and it's God's revelation, but it's applied to all people, not just the redeemed people. So obviously the redemptive kingdom only consists of those who are believers, but the broader civil sphere, the common kingdoms of this world, includes everybody. And so but there's a separation between the two in this age that will not be united until Christ comes again. And that's the biggest difference for Christian nationalists. They want to see this union of the two kingdoms. They deny the two kingdoms. They want to see everything under the lordship of Christ in the same way in this age. And what I'm saying, and what two kingdom theologians say, and by the way, I've got a book called Citizens and Exiles, Christian Faithfulness in God's Two Kingdoms, in which I articulate some of this, that these two kingdoms, or this twofold aspect of God's kingdom, will not be united until Jesus comes again, until there's one individual who's both king and priest, which of course is Jesus Christ.
So is that position taken and held because of eschatology?
No.
I mean, why can't the kingdom of God, the church, seep into? Why can't the leaven government? Because believers say, we have a lot of believers, and they vote in godly politicians, and the godly politicians say to the pastors and theologians of the land, how do I do this to the glory of God?
Yeah,
how do I do this biblically?
Yeah, so two kingdom theology would affirm that, because here's the thing, and this is why I use the title Citizens and Exiles. Christians are citizens of both kingdoms. And so as citizens, and I'm redeemed, I'm under the lordship of Christ, I'm part of Christ's spiritual kingdom in that sense, but I'm also a citizen of the United States of America, and the Bible has a lot to say about how I should live. And so I should live faithfully. That's the subtitle, Christian faithfulness. I should live faithfully in the public sphere. I should vote a certain way, influenced by my Christian faith. I should, my vocation should be influenced by my Christianity. And I agree with you completely that the more Christians that there are living faithfully in that way, that will impact the broader culture and impact politics. The difference is not how should Christians live. The difference is what ought we expect unbelievers to do. And what two kingdom theology would say is we can't expect unbelievers to claim to be Christian, right? And that is what Christian nationalists are after, right? That even a person who does not personally believe in Jesus Christ says, "Oh, I'm a Christian. I'm in a Christian nation." In some ways, and I made this application when I reviewed Wilson's book, not only is Christian nationalism sort of presuppose postmillennialism, but it also sort of presupposes a Presbyterian understanding of what a Christian is. In other words, that someone can be a Christian culturally or be part of Christianity without individually being a Christian. And again, as a Baptist, I say, no, that's not possible.
Yeah, same here.
So this is where I would say you cannot enforce the first 4 commandments of the moral law for unbelievers. The government does not have that jurisdiction or that authority from God. And that, again, is what Two Kingdom theology would say.
Yes.
That's the realm of the spiritual redemptive kingdom.
So for me, I just want to see the government enforce the second table.
Absolutely.
Please.
That is what God has ordained government to do. You see that very clearly in Romans chapter 13, right? God established.
I think the government can also do things that help support the church. Let's say like blue laws used to help. Let's say like tax-free organizations. The government did this to help the church along.
Yeah.
I'm really happy with the government supporting the church in ways that it can, so the church can do its work that only it can do.
Yeah, I'm a little less happy with that kind of thing because once the government, I mean, look at where we as churches are now. What happens when government says you either stop preaching the gospel or you're going to lose your tax exempt status? See, we've given government too much power over the church. It's worked out really well for us, but I don't think government has that right, and I think we've put ourselves in a bad position that one day might, the chickens might come home to roost. I think the government ought to promote freedom of religion, complete freedom of religion, not just for Christianity, but for all religions, in as much as those religions respect freedom of religion. So you get into a dicey situation with something like Islam, where we want freedom of religion, but Islam doesn't want freedom of religion. So in that sense, I think the government has all the right to shut down Islam if it wants to enforce its religious law on other citizens in this nation. But as much as religions are peaceable and respect the second table of the law sort of situations, I think that, if I were a Christian president with a Christian legislator, let's say we reach a majority status, I would say biblically the responsibility of those Christians in government would be to make religious liberty as strong as possible in this nation.
So I think the Christian nationalists that I'm liking would qualify that a little bit.
Right.
So they would say that you as an individual are welcome in a Christian nation to worship any God you want, any way you want. But it doesn't mean we'll let you build a mosque.
Right.
Right. So you can have it privately, but you can't have it publicly.
Right.
And that seems reasonable to me. If you did have a supermajority of believers and you've elected a whole lot of believers and the government is asking the question, how can we honor God? What can we do to help the church, et cetera, et cetera? The government might want to say, oh, we don't want that in here, right?
Yeah.
So no, you can't build a mosque.
But this is where eschatology does play in as well. And interestingly, Wilson sort of concedes this point in his book. Let's say we reach majority Christianity and then we outlaw all public forms of religion except for Christianity. Well, my eschatology says if that were to happen, there's no promise that Christians are going to remain in power.
Oh, that's true.
So what happens in 100 years when we've given government power to outlaw certain forms of religion and Christians are not in power anymore?
Yeah.
So now we've given them the power to outlaw Christianity. So that's where I would say, even in that case, we don't outlaw public forms of religion that are peaceable because, Wilson deals with this in his book. He talks about, should we outlaw blasphemy? And he actually comes down in a position that I agree with 100%. He says, we have to, I forget the exact language he uses, but we have to limit the greatest blasphemer first, and that's government. We don't want to give government the power to outlaw blasphemy because what happens when pagans get in power? They're going to outlaw Christianity. And so because I don't think things are going to get better and better and the kingdom of God is going to be established on this earth, and because I don't see warrant given to the government in the Bible to do this, I don't think the government has the right to outlaw blasphemy or outlaw any public forms of religion. Again, as long as those religions are peaceful and are not, trying to enforce their law on the citizenry.
Interesting. All right. Scott Aniol, thank you so much for joining me today on Grounded. I hope I'll be able to have you again someday. And for you listeners, thank you for joining me today. Would you do all the things that good listeners do, like and subscribe and share with a friend? And I forget what else is down there in the notes below. But go ahead and do those things. And by doing so, you encourage us, but you also help make this podcast available to others. Thank you. Bless you for doing so. See you next time.